be good. Okay, other questions, comments? Owen. Uh-huh. Sure. So, handle promise success will be called as soon as the response, as soon as the promise is fulfilled. That's it. As soon as we have a success request, this one gets called. The problem is, that's the job that the first one is doing. The job that the first one is doing is notifying us that the request was fulfilled and start order the conversion, order the parsing of the response body. The thing is that the parsing of the response body is in itself an asynchronous operation too. Meaning it can take some time, we don't know how long, and it could either succeed or fail. So this response.json will return to us a promise saying I will convert this body to a JavaScript object. The problem is that promise can succeed or fail and take long if it could also take long. And then because this returns, so here what we're doing basically is we're returning a new promise. I remember this was one of the toughest parts for me, like thinking about, so this fetch returns a promise. We put that promise into this variable. And then we attach that then to that promise so that when this promise is fulfilled, this function gets executed. And then this function itself, the handle promise success, will return another promise, a promise saying, I will try to convert this response body into a JavaScript object. I cannot assure you anything. I don't know if I will succeed. But it gives us a promise, and then we need to listen or wait for that promise to resolve. And that's what the second then is doing. Another way in which we could express this, I don't know if this will make it a little more clear. Let's do this. Let response. No, actually, we cannot really do this. We could do. Promise. And then we do response promise. I think this will work the same way, so that to separate the two promises and see if that makes a little bit more sense. Yeah, this still works. So here it is. No, this should be something like parsing promise. So this is really what this is returning, parsing promise. And let's call this one. Let's call this one. Oh shit. Let's call this one response promise. So here we have fetch will return to us a promise. I call that promise the response promise. Fetch is promising to get back to me with data or an error. I save that promise that fetch made. I save it to a variable called response promise. When the response promise is fulfilled, then I'll handle the promise success. I'll invoke this function called handle promise success. This function will receive the response as its argument. I console log promise fulfilled, response arrived, and I console log the response. And then this function will return another promise, a conversion promise, saying I will try to convert the body of this response to a JavaScript object. And that promise, I'm saving it to the parsing promise. So there's two promises going on. One is the response promise, the promise that is promising me a response. And then once I have that, I need to convert the body of the response, the data that came with the response, I need to convert it to a JavaScript object. That operation of the conversion, in this case, can take some time, and it might fail or succeed. If we try to pass in, if response contains data that is not valid JavaScript, valid JSON, the second promise, the parsing promise, will not be fulfilled because it promised me to try to convert the data to a JavaScript object, but it couldn't keep its promise. Sometimes you just can't. And we're going to see that next. But here, then, this handle promise will return to me a promise that the data will be converted. Now I need to I need to listen for when that promise succeeds by doing parsing promise that then. So if parsing promise is fulfilled, then execute handle parse response data. In this case, handle parse response data will be passed in the result of that conversion, the result of that parsing of the data from the readable string that we saw into a JavaScript object. And then that data here is the actually now parsed object that has two keys, message and status. I just call my display image function that is expecting a URL, as we can see here. My display image function is expecting a URL, and I'm passing in data, that message. That is the JavaScript, the message property of the data once it was parsed that came in the response. And we still have our app working as we expect. That is making a network request with fetch. So this you will not see fetch broken down. I think I like this that much. I broke it down trying to see if it makes more sense here. Let me show you the same thing, this exact same thing, but the more commonly seen version. Let's see if we can find an example here. Fetch. Actually, all this is like you cannot stay with only what you hear here and only with the content of the lecture. If you're staying all just with that, you're not going to be able to be successful. You have to read on yourself, make sure that you ask the questions from us, from the internet, from your peers. This content is not enough. I think that's something that we should leave, clear, I guess, at the beginning of each cohort. Saying like, you have to, I think we do so to some extent say like, you have to dedicate time after the time that you get here. to this, and I just want to stress that a little bit more. So fetch, let's look at here. This is the more commonly seen, I think it's something called using fetch. Yeah, these documents are really great to explain that. Here, this is more like what we will see it, and we can just do it like this. As long as you remember that the first .then is for once the response has arrived, and that this first .then should convert the response body to JSON, you're fine. After that, you can immediately say, okay, after that has been completed, then I got my parse data here. In this case, they call it my JSON. In this case, I wouldn't call it my JSON here, but this is the people who wrote the documentation. But this will be a JavaScript object. So here it says, here we're fetching a JSON file across the network. Oops. We're fetching a JSON file across the network and printing it to the console. The simplest use of fetch takes one argument, the path to the resource you want to fetch. Another word for path, URL. And returns a promise containing the response. So, not what I was trying to express earlier. This is just this response here, the first one. This is just an HTTP response, not the actual JSON, not the actual data. To extract the JSON, to extract the data body, the body content from the response, we use JSON method on the body mixin, which is implemented by both the request and response objects. Fetch requests are controlled by the, this is another thing, supplying request options. But yeah, this is basically what we're doing. And in here, I want to show you, so this here I broke down the two promises into its respective variables. But more commonly, this is what you will find. I'm going to do it like right here, I guess. Yeah, I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna move this all the way down here. I'm gonna leave it all here. I'm just gonna comment out all of this, including this, not this. So far our fetch dog image is just console login, and it will make the fetch request. In here, instead of saving that promise to a variable the way that I did it first, I just need to attach that then immediately. So that, and we know that the first then we need to pass in a function that will handle the response and convert it and extract the data from the response. And I could just write that function here. We know that in here we're going to get the response. As the documentation says, this is the actual HTTP response, not the data that we expect. We need to extract the data later. Response. And here, we could do return response.json. This will actually try to extract the data if it can, because, well, we're going to see next, once the data is not JSON, it's going to fail. But in this case, the good thing is that our network request is replying with JSON data, so this will succeed. And then, the next thing I want to do, then, I got the data. And what do I want to do with that data? Display image data dot message. This data here now is our extracted data from the response. And I'm missing a curly bracket there. Oh. This is the more common way to find it. Because you know that fetch returns a promise. This is known as chaining. You can just chain that then to the promise, right? This part here returns a promise. You chain at that then there, so that when the promise succeeds, you call this function here. Actually, here I don't need this parentheses, since we have just one argument, like that. Yes? Mm-hmm. Sure. Here. So this function, what it will do is receives HTTP response, initiates parsing of data. This one receives the parse data after successful full parsing, no, conversion or extraction. Here. So the first function receives the HTTP response with information like the 200 OK, the URL where it was made, whether it was a redirect at the end of the line. And then that response is the body where our data actually is. And we saw that that body was in that format that I said is not human readable. We cannot really, let's do this. We can see, I think we can still see it if I do console login here. And also something that I'm thinking here is I'm explaining you this, and I don't know if it will be the best way, but I'm explaining you this the way I wish I was explaining this. I basically was shown this, and I had to figure out like where the promises were kind of coming from, and then that's why I broke it down a little bit more. See if that makes more sense. But I don't know if I don't know if my way that I'm explaining it now or that I explained it just earlier, a little bit more broken down, will be helpful, right? I know that this is the way that I wish I was explaining, but I don't know if that's if that will be helpful here. You know what I mean? So this is exactly the same thing, just like one more condensed. And once you are comfortable, this will be the way that you want to do it. Really short. Here, so as I said, like this is the response, right? And the response has a body here. Here, this body is in this format, readable stream. This is not human readable. We cannot really see what the content is here. We need to convert this from that format, readable stream, to a JavaScript object. We do that by saying response.json. This response.json will parse in that data that is in the response body. And it will give us back a parse object. And in this case, I call data. Also call object. Data object. Then we can see that our app will still work as we expect. Let me see what else am I missing here. Oh, using promises with fetch. This is what we're talking about. This example here is with the. This example is with a different API. Let's look at how we're doing it here. Here we're doing it. We're creating this useless variable here, but you see fetch the URL. Oh, they're concatenating that URL with something else, like a search term, and then they say then response return response.json, and then that parse response is data about countries. We just call that data here countries. This is the parsed data now, and then because this is parsed now, this is well, in this case it won't be an object. In this case, it's being an array. We could just loop over the array as a regular array, and we're doing that for each on that. Lastly, we're returning countries. Let's see. Oh, and also we have this stat cache. Let's look at that next. And I think that's pretty much it after that. You should see these examples. How to make a post request. For the lab, you won't need to make a post request. But you should still visit this part here, a post request with fetch. In fact, I'll encourage you to try to make a post request with fetch to the to-dos API. Try to create a to-do with fetch sending data. I think some of you are already doing that, so that's great practice. And so, okay, let me show you just the error. I think I want to give you some time. Like the lab is similar to the one with the XML HTTP request, but with a list of countries, I think. Let me look at it here. Ajax lab, promises lab. Yeah, it's the same. Like you won't be making a post request. You will be making using fetch, get random jokes from the joke API, and then display them to the screen. So basically, what we did today, we were just fetching dog photos, and what we did yesterday. It's basically the same thing, but now we are, instead of XML HTTP requests, we want you to get some practice with fetch, making network requests with fetch. A list of jokes. So let me then just cover the catch. So it's important that we have a plan in case the network request fails. Oh, actually, before we move on there, questions, comments, concerns? Cameron? A little bit, one more time?
What's the purpose of like this over send and open we used yesterday?
What's the purpose of fetch over XML HTTP request?
It's like better, faster, more secure.
It's easier for us, the developers. Yes. Mm-hmm. We want to be lazy. Developers are lazy, but they are lazy by being I don't know how to express it, but like I remember when I was at work, I had to do this step manually, and I hated that I had to do this step manually, and then I wrote a small program that would do it for me. So like that's being lazy. I didn't want to spend those 15 minutes writing the stuff manually that the computer could do, but then we have a program do it instead. Owen.
We have to choose that because of the two promises?
That's correct. Yes, one promise is for the resolution of the response, and the other one is for the resolution of extracting the data from the response. Mm-hmm. join. Here. Okay, so we see what happens when the request fails. Here, let's change the URL to something that hopefully is gonna give us a 404. Let's verify this first. I modified the URL. We got this is what we got. Error, no route found for get, and we got code 404. So I think this constitutes an error, right? Says error clearly, but let's see if, so I have this URL broken. I remove the DOM from the end. Now let's try to get a photo from a dog from this URL. Refresh this. We already see that, well, because we already see a broken image here. As I open the console, we see get HTTP error ran slash image slash ran 404, and we get some, I think this is the same thing. And note here that how we have the response. Oh, we got the response. We got the status 404. This body here, the same body that we were looking at earlier, it will have now this the new data constituting the error, but not that we don't see the actually parsed data, right? We don't see the object that we don't see this object that we saw here. We don't see this object. That is because the request failed. The request failed, therefore the parsing never occurred. But actually, I'm a little bit confused because I would not expect this console log to be running. Oh, I guess. Okay, so let's look at this. So for handling an error, what we have is we have another higher order function. So when you're dealing with promises, you will want to always include these two, which is .then and .catch. .catch is like .then, but when the request fails. Then is when it succeeds. .catch is when it fails. And here, I'm just going to write it right here. To the catch will receive the error, and then we can try to console log error. See what we get. I hope that, I think explaining fetch and understanding fetch is harder than actually using it. Because I think you just need to remember that there's, you need to do two .thens. One .then needs to do, the first .then needs to do response.json, and the next one you just get the data here. Okay, and then here we have that catch. That catch, as it as the name indicates, will catch the error in case there's one. So let's look at see if we have this console log error. Refresh, and we don't. Wait, did I save? I did save. I'm seeing this other error. I'm not sure what it's about. Ajax no route found for get API. Let's look at the network. Here we can see the request again, 404. Response. Status error message. Oh. Wait. Huh. I'm not sure. It seems to be that. Let's see. JSON input. Now this should be valid JSON. Let's see. Let's remove this. Yeah. So one error is this error. This error is by default, I think, line 37. Yeah. So this first error that we get here is this is the browser like showing to us that there was an error in the network, that the network request did not succeed. And it says pointing to line 37. That means it's being generated here. And then I'm really confused by this second one because oh, I see now. So this is, if I comment this line out, we don't get the second one. Here, so, okay, let's back up a little bit. So we have a broken URL, therefore the request will fail. Right? Actually, let me see. So let me see if we ever see this console log error. Yeah, okay, so we never saw this. I was expecting us to see this error here. What that is saying is that a 404 by fetch will not be seen as an error. Because, well, one, I'm still seeing this. So, okay, so let's look at what if we don't have a connection? What if we don't have internet? So I'm going to simulate not having internet by going to the network tab and saying offline. Offline will definitely constitute an error. An error that will make it so that we see the console log with the error. So I disconnected here by setting this offline. I'm going to click the button. I'm going to refresh. And now we have error. Type error failed to fetch. So this is like a true error. This is, if we think about it, even though we have a broken URL, even though we have this broken URL, even though we have this broken URL here, we're still getting something from the API. So you see how we are, even though we have a broken URL, the server is still replying back saying, hey, I don't understand that. I'm going to give you this object or this JSON, indicating you that this is an error, right? That I couldn't find what you were looking for. But it still replied with some data, and that data was still JSON. It replied with a data with a JSON that has 3 properties: status, message, and code. Now, if we do here, like if I do console.log data object, this is the parse data now. I should be able to see this. That is if I'm connected to the internet, which I'm gonna be now. I go to network, get it back online. Go back to the console, refresh. We can see here, this is the data. This is the data object. So this is, I apologize for this. This is the network request didn't really fail. But it becomes a matter of what do you call a network request failure, right? Because we still received some data. It was not the data that we were expecting, right? It doesn't have the URL for the dog that we were expecting, right? And it was a 404. The browser definitely says is notifying me that I got a 404, that I should look at that, right? But fetch will not, like that request, that promise was not rejected. That promise was still fulfilled. It's just that you can think of the fulfillment of the request was not what we were expecting. Yes, Joy? Yeah, we'll want to handle if we want to properly handle this error. Yes, we'll want to do an if statement if the status is not 200, then do something about it. But here, so the only way in which we're gonna get an error here is like if we don't find, this will also give us an error. So we saw that just changing the endpoint will not give us a fetch error. It gives us the network error that the browser is gonna tell us about, but the server is still replying back with some data, right? The server is still replying back with some data. Now, if I change the domain name to a domain that doesn't exist, now that will probably constitute a true error that will make this appear. Let's look at that. Let's do example.ceo. This is probably a domain that doesn't exist, and probably is not going to return what we expect. Actually, let's try this in the browser. Let's see what the browser says about it first. This site cannot be reached. My computer has internet, but this site, example.ceo API, cannot be reached. So let's see what we will get if we put in that in here, which we already have. Now we get the error. Now we get like the request was rejected. The promise was rejected because here it even says error name not resolved. That means I couldn't find a server with this name, example.ceo. So you will want to, if we avoid this, if we don't include this catch, what do you think is going to happen? We'll just have an uncaught in-promise type error, fail to fetch. So we want the catch. For instance, let's say if have you seen some websites? I think like your bank does this, where if it has an error, it says like it can tell you about, we have an error, please try again later, something like that. So this is logic that I want to implement in here, in my catch, right? As Joey suggested also, in here, if we know that we might get a 404 for some reason, we will also want to implement an if statement checking if the status is 404, or if it's not a good status code, to handle that as well. But you want to catch errors in general, because also, like here, if you don't handle an error like this, your app can crash, or your user will just see the error. Right? In this case, well, the user will see the error because I'm console logging, but they'll only see like this automatically printed error here that is being done by the browser. Yes, Savita? Great question. Catch will listen for the rejection of a promise. When a promise cannot be fulfilled. Like in this case, the promise of fetching a resource from this URL cannot be fulfilled because this URL doesn't exist. Or not the URL as a whole, but this domain name does not exist. So catch will allow you to listen for those errors. Anything that returns a promise, therefore it can succeed or fail, and it will take some time. You don't know how much time it's going to take. You want to attach always a then in a catch. A that then for handling the success, and that catch for handling the failure. So catch allows to specify a function that will be fired in the event of a failure in the promise. So here's another thing that could fail. I said that response.json returns a promise as well, because the conversion, the parsing can fail. Because what happens if the response that is trying to parse is not JSON? We can do that if we let's look at a simple website. Let's do like Craigslist. Craigslist.com. So Craigslist.com, if I go to Craigslist.com or New York.craigslist.org, I get the Craigslist page, right? What do you think I'm going to get if I try to go to this URL using fetch? Or I try to get something from this URL using fetch? Any suggestions or speculation as to what we're going to get? Michael? Error. Where is the error going to come from? That's correct. Because this is a valid URL, right? This is a valid, the fetcher is going to go there and is going to be able to retrieve some information. But in our case, we're expecting that information to be in JSON format. Now, is the Craigslist website in JSON format? It's not. What format is it on? HTML. So when we try to convert a HTML document to a JSON, this thing here will fail. because there is an HTML document is not in JSON format. We cannot really parse it directly. So let's look at, I put the Craigslist URL here. Now let's look at our website. Let's refresh. We got a failure. It was not the type of failure that I expected. Access to fetch ad from origin null has been blocked by course. So this is saying the people at newyork.craigslist.org will not let me access the information or anything from that page from another page. So here, basically, I'm trying to fetch this information, but that server will not let me do that. Now I'm trying to think about another example with another URL that we could use here. Maybe Twitter. Let's try twitter.com. I have the feeling that I'm going to get the same error. Yeah. We'll need, so to see the response.json fail, we'll need to have data that is not in JSON. But for doing that, we also need a server that will return data that is not JSON. Actually, I guess I could use this website. So nobody has been able to find the Easter egg in the API so far, right? I can see that because I have and here I can see that where I keep the users, I have a table called winners. Oh, this is this was one test, but anyway, there is nobody here. So I'm gonna use that API. So here, I'm gonna reveal to you the Easter egg endpoint, and you have to figure it out from there. So the Easter egg endpoint was, I left it when I asked you about how many requests have you found. Where is that? It's in here. Here, I ask you, there are 6 status codes. How many have you found? And I put intentionally this slash here to see if you will see that and maybe try it. So if you go to the API, FSW, let's do this. Like, just go first to the main endpoint. And this takes us, always the first request takes a little bit of time because of the API is sleeping. And do /6, and I get this. And here we got this HTML page with that GIF and some information. So you want to follow that information. If the price still up, but then here what I want to do is I want to use this URL. This URL is giving me back JSON data, not JSON, HTML data, right? This is an HTML page. If I inspect it, I see HTML in here. There's an image tag, there's a script tag, pre tag, etc. Now this is the URL that I want to use to try to have this break here. Yeah, I'm going to use that URL here. We know that this URL will give me HTML, therefore it cannot be parsed as JSON. And now we should see this break here because it's going to try to convert that HTML to JSON, and it's just going to freak out. See that? Now let's look at the error. So the error was caught. If I don't have the catch, I never catch the error. The error was caught, and it says syntax error, unexpected token, open angle bracket in JSON at position 5. This is, I was expecting this thing that you gave me to be JSON, but instead I found a angle bracket at position 5. if we look at this page at position 5, we will see an angle bracket opening. But here, so the point that I wanted to demonstrate here was how the request could also fail if the data that came back was not in JSON format. And then we get this error, unexpected token in JSON. Okay. We can see that we still see the response. Oh, we can see I put this status code for that endpoint. That stands for I'm a teapot. And we got that our request now failed. It failed here. We can see it failed on trying to convert something that couldn't be converted to a JSON. Let's get back to, and then we were seeing that other weird error because I was passing in data object.message to be the URL of my photo, but in that case, when we didn't get a URL, that message contained a string saying no route found, right, in here. And this is not a URL, and I was trying to use this as a URL for an image. That was the second error. So let's get this back to before. Random. Refresh, then we get our random dog. We do it again. So that's pretty much it. That is fetch. Yes, Joey. Yeah, yes, you can still win them. Let's see. If you are in this, if you are here, no, you're not here yet. So that means that there's maybe one step that you're not completing yet. Did it congratulated you? It congratulated you? Take a screenshot, yeah. It should be here. Cool. So just as, actually, we're just gonna get to do the lab, get as much done as possible, but it's basically we indirectly solve the lab here by making this network request with fetch. You just need to apply this for the lab, and that will be it. Other questions, comments? Also, let's do the exit ticket. After that, let's take a 5-minute break and get back to our work. The exit ticket, you can find it in the, as always, in the calendar. Say that again? Wait, which one did I have? No, this is Ajax. Oh yeah, it is different. We're still covering the same topics though. fetch, fetch and promises. This one didn't cover promises, I think. This covered fetch. That's because of, we have a separate branch. It's still the same topic. I don't think we actually cover more than this original lesson.